Have you ever wondered what happens when a young boy stumbles upon a mysterious house in the dead of night? Who is the shadowy figure sitting silently by the candlelight? Why does a chilling scream shatter the stillness of the forest? What secret could a deserted household that's tied to a dark promise? And what happens when the truth is finally revealed too late? Join us as we explore Ambrose Bierce's classic tale, reimagined for a spine-tingling experience.
The boy froze, staring at the dim, flickering light spilling from the ruined window. A cold memory gnawed at him. He had once helped shatter that very glass. Guilt coiled in his chest, sharp and belated, heavy with regret for a crime long past. He half expected the vengeful spirits of the house, unseen and bodiless, to rise and punish him for disturbing both their windows and their peace. Yet, despite the tremor in his limbs and the icy brush of fear crawling down his spine, he could not turn back. There was iron in his blood, the unyielding courage of a frontier boy whose ancestors had wrested the land from the wilderness. He squared his shoulders and moved forward, stepping closer to the house with cautious determination. As he passed the threshold of shadow and moonlight, he glimpsed something that made him stop dead. A man sat at a table in the center of the room, motionless, like a figure carved from the night itself. Loose sheets of paper were scattered across the surface. The man's elbows pressed down on the table, hands clutching his head, fingers tangled in hair. One side of his face glowed a ghastly yellow from a single lopsided candle, while the other was swallowed by darkness. The boy's breath hitched. The figure's eyes stared blankly into the shattered window pane, soulless, unblinking, frozen. In the harsh, wavering candlelight, the boy could not tell if the man was alive or dead. Horror rooted him to the spot, but fascination held him just as tightly. His legs shook, his blood ran cold, and yet he advanced. It was not bravery so much as the raw, uncontrollable impulse of fear driving him forward. He leaned closer, pressing his pale, trembling face toward the open window, and then a sharp, ear-splitting cry tore through the night, harsh and wild, the screech of an owl or something far stranger. In an instant, the man sprang up, knocking over the table. Papers flew like startled birds, and the candle clattered to the floor, extinguishing the light and plunging the clearing into darkness. The boy didn't wait to question what he had seen. He turned on his heels, heart hammering, and ran into the shadows of the forest, the shriek echoing after him like a warning he could never forget. The next morning, sunlight spilled over the city streets, but inside a quiet parlor, two men were already deep in conversation. "Good morning, Colston," said one, a playful grin tugging at his lips. "Seems I've hit the jackpot today. You've often joked that my praise of your stories is all politeness, but here I am, completely absorbed, lost in your latest piece in the Messenger. I had needed nothing less than a tap on the shoulder to pull me back to reality." Colston's eyes sparkled with a hint of mischief. "Absorption alone proves my point. You're so eager to read that you'd willingly set aside every selfish concern, foregoing even the pleasure you might take in it, just to immerse yourself." The first man frowned, folding the newspaper and tucking it into his pocket. "I don't follow. You writers are a strange breed. How could my enjoyment or lack thereof have anything to do with you?"
"In more ways than you realize," Colston replied, leaning forward. "Picture this. Would your breakfast taste any better if you ate it on a rattling streetcar? Suppose a phonograph could perfectly reproduce an entire opera, voices, instruments, every note. Would it thrill you if you listened to it during the chaos of your morning commute? Could you truly savor a serenade by Schubert if it came through the scratchy bow of some untimely violinist on a ferry? Are you ever truly ready for enjoyment at a moment's notice?" He paused, letting his words sink in. Sir, allow me to remind you, the story you've so graciously started reading just now as a distraction from the discomfort of this ride is a ghost story. The other man blinked. Well? Well, does a reader have no duties along with their privileges? Colston exclaimed, pacing the small aisle of the streetcar. You've paid your 5 cents for that newspaper. It's yours. You can read it anywhere, anytime. Most of its contents barely care whether you read them here or there, now or later. But my story, it's different. It's not breaking news from the ghostly realm. You are not expected to stay constantly updated on the affairs of the spectral world. My tale waits, yes, but it demands that you enter it under the proper conditions. Marsh raised an eyebrow. Proper conditions? Like what? The right mindset, Colston snapped, his voice rising with every word. The right mood, the proper solitude. Reading it amidst the clatter of this streetcar, with the throngs outside, the buildings sliding past your window, the ceaseless chatter, it's an injustice to both you and the story. An author has rights too, and you, dear reader, are bound to respect them. For example, Marsh asked, curious despite himself. The right to undivided attention, Colston said, gripping one of the hanging straps for support, his voice nearly trembling with intensity. To deny this is immoral, to demand that a mind split between rattling wheels, passing crowds, and the mundane clamor of the street engage with the delicate terror of a ghost story, by God, it's scandalous, infamous. Marsh stared, astonished at the fervor in his friend's face. Colston's pallor was unnatural, his eyes glowing with an almost unearthly intensity. You know what I mean, Marsh, he pressed on, leaning closer, words tumbling fast and urgent. This morning's story is boldly labeled a ghost story. That heading alone carries an implicit warning. Every honorable reader will understand that it prescribes the conditions under which it must be read. Anything less, well, you're simply cheating yourself of its proper effect.
Marsh gave a small, wry smile, wincing slightly. Conditions, you say? You know I'm just a plain businessman, Colston. I can't be expected to understand such artistic subtleties. So tell me, when, where, how exactly should I read your ghost story? In solitude, Colston replied, his voice low but firm. At night, by the soft flicker of a single candle. You see, some emotions, a chuckle, a tear, even a pang of sympathy, can be stirred almost anywhere. But fear, genuine fear, that tingling sense of the supernatural, that requires care. I have the right to expect that if you read my story at all, you will grant it its full chance. You must open yourself to it, let yourself feel what I intend to inspire. By now, the car had reached its terminus, coming to a quiet stop. Their conversation had gone uninterrupted, the streets outside still hushed, the rooftops catching the first pale rays of the rising sun. As the two men stepped from the car and began to walk together, Marsh studied Colston more closely. There were whispers, like there always are about men of uncommon talent, that he indulged in dangerous habits. Genius, it seemed, often came with its own shadow. Some said Colston was given to opium. Others noted his sharp mind, his intensity as evidence enough. That morning, something about Colston confirmed these rumors to Marsh. A wildness in his eyes, an unusual pallor, the quick, almost breathless cadence of his words. And yet, despite any caution he might have felt, he could not tear himself away from the conversation. The story, the man, the ideas, they had him in their grip. He followed, intrigued, even as a shiver of unease ran down his spine. "Are you saying," Marsh began, his voice edged with skepticism, "that if I follow your rules, solitude, nightfall, a single tallow candle, you can actually make me feel this supernatural unease you speak of, That you can quicken my pulse, make me jump at every sound, send a chill creeping down my spine, make my hair stand on end?" Colston stopped mid-step, fixing him with a sharp, unwavering gaze. "You wouldn't dare," he said, his tone dripping with contempt. "You think yourself brave enough to read my story on a streetcar, but in a deserted house, alone, in the forest, at night? Bah! I have a manuscript in my pocket that would utterly terrify you." Marsh bristled. He was no coward, and the words pricked at his pride. "If such a place exists," he said, leaning closer, "take me there tonight. Leave me your story and a candle. Give me time to read it, then call for me, and I promise I'll recount the whole plot and kick you out afterward." And so it was that the farmer's boy, wandering through the darkened woods and peering through the broken window of the breed house, saw a solitary man sitting, illuminated by the flicker of a lone candle. Late in the afternoon, the boy led 3 men toward the breed house, the same path he had fled along the previous night. The men were in high spirits, their laughter echoing through the quiet woods. They teased the boy relentlessly, poking fun at his story, clearly treating his terrifying encounter as little more than an overactive imagination. The boy said nothing. He carried a quiet dignity, knowing that one who claims to have seen a dead man rise and extinguish a candle is not a witness easily believed. When they reached the house, the door swung open without resistance, as though inviting them inside. They stepped into the narrow entryway, where doors led off to the left and right. Choosing the left, they entered the room with the broken front window, the very window through which the boy had peered in the night before. And there it was. A man lay dead on the floor, partially on his side, one forearm tucked beneath him, his cheek pressed to the boards. His eyes stared wide and unblinking into the room, a gaze so unnerving that even the bravest paused. The lower jaw had slackened, a small pool of saliva forming beneath his mouth. Around him, the chaos of the previous night lingered, an overturned table, a partially burned candle, a toppled chair, and scattered sheets of manuscript. The men examined the body in silence, taking turns touching the face as though confirming reality itself. The boy stood at the head of the corpse, a quiet pride in his stance. This was his moment, perhaps the proudest he had ever known. "You've got a good eye," one of the men said, nodding toward the boy. The others murmured agreement, skepticism conceding to truth. As evening shadows began to creep across the forest outside, one of the men picked up a sheet of manuscript from the floor. The distant song of a whippoorwill drifted through the clearing, and a massive beetle whirred past the window, wings buzzing like a distant drum. He held the paper to the dim light and began to read. Before carrying out the decision he had already sealed within himself, the man put his thoughts to paper, not as a plea for mercy, but as a final act of duty. "Before I do what I have chosen to do," the statement began, "and before I stand before whatever judgment awaits me, I feel compelled, as a journalist, to speak plainly to the public." He identified himself as James R. Colston, a name familiar to readers of grim and tragic fiction. Yet he dismissed that reputation at once. No tale he had ever written, he insisted, came close to the true darkness of his own existence. Not because his life had been filled with dramatic events. On the contrary, it had been dull, uneventful, almost painfully ordinary. But his mind, he wrote, had been a far more dangerous landscape, a place scorched by thoughts and memories capable of destroying a man. Experiences too violent for ink, some already written down elsewhere, waiting for publication. This document, he explained, served a single purpose, to make one thing unmistakably clear. His death would not be an accident, nor would it be madness. It would be intentional. He declared that he would die at midnight on July 15th, a date burned into his memory. On that same night, At that same hour, years earlier, his closest friend, Charles Breed, had fulfilled a terrible promise. Breed had taken his own life in the small house hidden deep in the Copton woods. The world, Colston noted bitterly, had settled for a convenient explanation. Temporary insanity, they had called it. And perhaps that verdict would have been different had Colston spoken. But silence had been easier. Had he told the truth, he believed, they would have branded him mad as well. At this point, the reader paused. Several lines followed, long, dense, written in a hand too personal to share aloud. When the man resumed reading, his voice returned to the room. "I have 1 week remaining," the manuscript continued, "time enough to settle what little I own and prepare myself for what follows. My affairs are few. They have been so ever since death became not an idea, but an obligation 4 years ago." The final instruction was brief, precise, unmistakable. "This document will be found on my person. I ask that whoever discovers it deliver it directly to the coroner." The page ended there. No plea, no apology, only certainty. James R. Colston. P.S. Willard Marsh, on this, the fateful 15th of July, I entrust you with this manuscript. Read it under the conditions we agreed upon at the place I designated. I have abandoned the notion of carrying it on my person to explain the details of my death. It matters little now, but it will serve to illuminate the manner of yours. I shall come for you during the night to ensure you have read it. You know me well enough to expect it, but my friend, it will not be before midnight. May God have mercy on our souls. J.R.C. As the man reading the manuscript reached the end, a single candle was lit. Quietly, deliberately, he pressed the paper into the flame. Despite the protests of the others, he held it there until it was reduced to ashes. The man who performed this act, and who afterward calmly endured a stern reprimand from the coroner, was a son-in-law of the late Charles Breed. At the inquest, no one could reconstruct the contents of the destroyed manuscript. From The Times, modernized report. Yesterday, the Commissioners of Lunacy committed James R. Colston, a writer of local reputation associated with the Messenger, to an asylum. On the evening of July 15th, he was taken into custody by a fellow lodger at the Bain House, when the lodger observed him behaving strangely, baring his throat, sharpening a razor, and occasionally testing its edge against his own skin. Upon handing him over to the authorities, Colston resisted violently. Since then, he has been so uncontrollable that he requires a straitjacket for restraint. Meanwhile, most of his fellow writers remain at large.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.